We are 5 weeks in and we've pretty much decided who are our studs and who are our duds. So it seems like a good time to look back at the round one of redraft leagues last year based on ADP and have a little bit of a value check. And that's exactly what Ed and I did on the main show this week. The reason we have a look at that ADP value check is because we want to see how that top 12 are kind of shaping up in the season. Because look, we always think in the off season, there are certain things that are absolute guarantees and it can't possibly go wrong. And then every year, the guarantees are not guarantees and we are surprised. So let's have a look at how it's going this year. But first, this has been a bugbear of yours for a little while. So lots of people talk about and track the Madden cover curse. But you like to track the Fantasy 101 curse here at TH Fantasy Football. And you said pre-season that as soon as it was Saquon for a bit, then it was Ja'Marr Chase that took over that mantle, which made you very sad because that meant you felt you were certain it was all going to go down the pan for Ja'Marr Chase.
I blame that curse entirely for Joe Burrow's injury.
Well, let's see how relevant the curse actually is then. So I've gone back to 2021. So we're looking at the last 5 seasons, including this season. 2021, CMC was the 101, finished RB 38 after playing only 7 games. 2022, Jonathan Taylor was the 101. After a stellar first season, he finished RB 38, playing 11 games and averaging 13.3 points per game across that window. 2023, Justin Jefferson finished as wide receiver 33 and playing 10 games, but was averaging 20.2 points per game either side of his injury. So he came as advertised. It was an unfortunate injury. Then last year, CMC again. He was RB 68, only featured in 4 games, with only 2 being fantasy relevant. And everyone spent the offseason being very, very cross that he had ruined it for them and they would never draft him ever again. 2025 then, Ed. Let's work our way through the top 12 picks. Ja'Marr Chase, currently wide receiver 9, 17.1 fantasy points per game. Right, let's be clear. The 5 games means that the average can lack little integrity when it comes to a data point because Ja'Marr Chase has had a couple of big weeks, a couple of shockers in there so far. So that average points per game isn't really that meaningful for some of these players. Hugely impacted by Burrow being out. His week 2 performance looked really promising of signs things to come from the pair again this year. And I think it will be up and down from here on in for Chase. He's never going to be in the benching conversation. A lot of wide receivers, after getting your 7-point weeks, you would be thinking about benching them. But you just never can tell with Ja'Marr Chase. And this week, he absolutely smashed it again and gave you hope for the future once more. I just think the concern is that over the course of the last year, he averaged 13.4 yards per target with Burrow. Weeks 3 and 4, he averaged 7.3 yards per target with Browning. And even this week, when he was back up to form, that was 11 yards per target. It's going to be inconsistent, but you're never going to bench him, are you?
No, quite simply, no. He won't have as many big weeks. And I think even under Burrow, you would always be guaranteed maybe 15 points. But I think he's going to have more dud weeks under Browning where he's under 10 points. But you just can't risk leaving someone like Chase on your bench.
Saquon Barkley went off number 2, currently RB9 with 16.1 fantasy points per game so far. Regression of sorts felt obvious after such a big 2024. But currently sitting at that RB9 isn't where we maybe expected that to be. Currently 3.25 yards per carry after averaging 5.81 across 2024. But he's got a good run of games coming up that are quite friendly to running back. So hopefully that will offset the disappointment so far. Only 6 carries this week was an anomaly, but a receiving touchdown salvaged things for him for fantasy. He was a player that I think I was much happier drafting around 3, 4, 5. So I didn't have to make the decision of not taking Saquon because I think we've talked ourselves into the fact that it doesn't repeat the curse of the first player. I think we were quite happy not to make that decision. And that's kind of paid off, really, when you then look at Bijan. So went off as 3rd player off the board, currently RB7, 21.9 points per game. And that includes his bye week. So he's down at RB7, but he's played a game fewer than the other running backs ahead of him. He's the first player you can be happy with on this list, really. steady continues in the pass game is exactly what we're hoping for this season. 11.74 yards per carry is per target. Sorry, is very pleasing too. Only one rushing touchdown so far, but it's early in the season. He's the sort of player that has a couple of 3 touchdown games in him, a la what we've seen from Jonathan Taylor as well. Jahmyr Gibbs, currently RB4, 19.1 fantasy points per game. He's been consistent so far, hasn't dropped below 15 fantasy points in a game yet. 4 rushing touchdowns and 1 receiving touchdown. Absolutely nothing to worry about. Although I would have bet my house on him getting 2 touchdowns on the ground or through the air against the Bengals. It just didn't happen. I expect him to be a top 10 fantasy player in overall when the season is done. And yeah, I'm not worried about him at all at a point where I think maybe we expected bigger things out of the gate, but Monty is still relevant. I just think we saw in that game, I think was it last week, where Monty went off the boil and Gibbs still get it done. He just does get it done week in, week out, and he seems fairly safe. Next up, though, Ed, over to you for Justin Jefferson.
Yes, I mean, he went off the board as 105. I'd say he's been steady, if unspectacular, this season. He's not had a dud week, but also yet to really go off. His highest weekly score was 22.6 points. Now, clearly, the QB situation in Minnesota is an issue. You've got JJ McCarthy's lingering injury. That's not helped. And Carson Wentz is not who you want thrown in the ball, in an ideal world. 11 targets and 100-plus yards in the last couple of weeks. In both weeks is much more promising. But he's only had 1 touchdown all season. That was back in week 1, so that is not as promising. There's a bye for the Vikings this week, so you'd hope McCarthy would be back after that bye. But the Vikings have got a tough run of games defensively. Eagles, Chargers, Broncos, all strong defenses. Look, JJ's going to comfortably be a top 10 wide receiver, but that isn't what you drafted. You drafted him to be a top 3 wide receiver, and I'm not sure I've got huge confidence in him being top 3 to 5 at the moment, which is what you'd want. I mean, what do you think I'm being a bit harsh? Do you think he will come good, or is that quarterback situation, which we were a bit nervous about, coming to fruition?
I suppose we're a bit in the same position as last year. We've not seen enough of JJ McCarthy, have we? Like, the injury is awful time for him to kind of get into a rhythm and prove himself over the course of the season. But yeah, you're right. We don't want Wentz throwing the ball. Jefferson is the sort of player that, similar to several of these, you draft them this high because they've got the big weeks in them. So he could end up there or thereabouts, but it might not feel like that on a week-by-week basis. Does that make sense?
No, definitely. I think that's a good way to describe it. And I mean, I suppose CeeDee Lamb at the 106 is in a similar position. He's currently a wide receiver 42, averaging 12.7 points per game, but it's difficult to judge him due to this ongoing high ankle sprain. He's missed 3 games, looks likely to miss at least another game or 2. Was very, very solid in his first 2 games of the season, averaging 8 receptions and 100 yards a game despite no touchdowns. Pickens and Ferguson have been the big beneficiaries, but I have little doubt that Lamb is the top target for Dak when he returns in that high-powered offense. Moving on to Amon-Ra, quiet week 1, but after that he's been absolutely relentless and only sits behind Puka. The Lions offense have clicked into top gear, and he's going to be the main beneficiary of that. Currently wide receiver 2, averaging 23.6 points per game. He's almost guaranteed 7 to 8 receptions, 1,700 yards, and a touchdown every week. Plus, he's going to have wide receiver 1 weeks, like his 3 touchdown week 2 performance against the Bears. And I'd say he's probably nailed on as a top 3 receiver, barring injury. And then it's that time, Sir Mark, to talk about your whole lot of beef, Derrick Henry. I don't think we expected him to be RB22 with 12.5 points per game. I'm not really sure how we explain what's happened to Derrick Henry. He went off as RB1 in week 1. We thought, here we go, back to business. But between weeks 2 to 4, he averaged 10 carries a game. And if you had shares in him, I mean, you're probably going to be worried. Add into the mix Lamar Jackson's injury, amongst many injuries for the Ravens, which are impacting on Henry. You'd be forgiven for pressing the panic button. he averaged just 2.2 yards per carry against the Texans, which is a concern for Derrick Henry and his managers.
Yeah, the O-line's in an absolute mess, and I'm not one to blame injuries, but I think there was the stat about 160 million of the Ravens' cap was on the sidelines yesterday.
Wow.
And that has a huge impact. But I think it looks a bit of a confidence thing with Derrick Henry, which it isn't what you've ever seen from Derrick Henry before. And like we said, after the first fumble, expected him to not fumble again and run over the next player. And then we kind of had that again. You expect he could have one big game and go on, but we've said that a couple of weeks now. So when's that coming, I guess, is the worry, isn't it?
Yeah, and like you say, Ravens obviously are in a difficult spot with injuries, and that I'm sure you don't need to tell you that was a horrible defeat against the Texans, and it doesn't bode well for the next few weeks.
All right, I didn't mind it. Before we move on, then say tell me to subscribe, like, and share before we start to discuss CMC. Do you remember, Ed, when all that panic pre-season when we heard about the calf injury, all the people refusing to draft him? I can remember taking him 5th overall in a redraft league, and people say, "Oh, that's an overspend. What are you worry about this?" And kind of genuinely find it laughable you take him there. And we always felt quite confident with that because when he's on the field, he is an absolute monster. And that is what we've seen from now. So he's a player I've got loads of shares in redraft because if I'd picked 4 or later, he was probably my auto pick at that point. And I just think that it's highly likely that he just gets better for fantasy as season progresses because he's not got a single rushing touchdown yet. Yes, he's got 3 receiving touchdowns. What if they start coming? He's just going to be putting up monstrous numbers, and he's currently the RB1 overall as well, averaging 56 rushing yards per game, 77 receiving yards as he offsets some of the injury strain for the 49ers as well. Is more than paid you back wherever you took him in redraft those first 5 games, and he is for me at the minute one of the absolute bargains of round 1. Say not closely followed by, superseded by Puka Nacua, who was averaging going at the 110. Current wide receiver 1, 26.8 fantasy points per game. Points. That's what you get with Puka. A low, an absolute shocking low in week 3 of a mere 22.8 points. And he's only averaging 10 receptions per game. He's just an absolute phenomenon. I think in my history of playing fantasy football, he is the greatest dynasty value pick I can think of, considering his 2023 rookie ADP of wide receiver 15, going undrafted in a lot of rookie drafts. It's just been phenomenal value so far. If you were drafting around the 9-10 point, there is every chance you ended up with, or had at least the choice of, Puka Nacua, and then in round 2, going QB early and Josh Allen. If you did that, you're absolutely laughing. It is the absolute golden window of the draft so far. Obviously, that can change throughout the season. But yeah, you're on a fast track to the playoffs at present if you went for that. And you probably thought you might be with the following player as well up until last week.
Yeah, if Puka Nacua is happy times, Malik Nabers is definitely the opposite. Sad times, more for him than for fantasy managers. Obviously done for the season following that horrible ACL injury. He promised so much after that mega week 2 against the Cowboys. It would have been nice to see how he might have fared with Jackson Dart, but we just have to kind of hope that he comes back fit and firing. And finally, if we look at the 112 in redraft leagues, and that was the rookie superstar, Ashton Jeanty, currently RB14 with 15 points per game. Let's be honest, for us, Jeanty was always going far too high in redraft.
Yeah.
He's going to be a fancy beast, but he was entering an uncertain situation in Vegas with a below-average quarterback and just not a very good team around him. So there were always question marks. He had a very quiet week, weeks 1 to 3, and that would have prompted worries. But the last 2 weeks seem to have showcased the talent that he's got. RB1 last week with those 3 total touchdowns and over 250 yards from scrimmage across the last 2 weeks. That suggests that there's, real potential there. And he's had a bit of an uptick in receiving work, which is interesting. 5 of 7 for 42 yards this week, maybe benefiting from the absence of Brock Bowers. I think he's going to comfortably be a top 10 running back this season as he learns his trade. But, you're not going to get the fireworks of week 4 every week. And yeah, as we said at the start of season, he was being overdrafted. That's just coming to fruition, really.
You have been listening to the team from TH Fantasy Football. For more content, follow TH_fantasy_NFL on Twitter and Instagram.